Daniel Carter's life was defined by precision, numbers, deals, and appearances. As one of the youngest billionaire CEOs in the country, he was admired for his success but feared for his cold, untouchable presence. The last thing anyone expected was for him to extend an invitation to someone far outside his glittering world. Yet on a quiet Friday evening, in the warmth of his sprawling home, Daniel surprised everyone. Maria, the nanny who had been caring for his daughter for years, stood frozen when he asked her to accompany him to the company's annual gala. She thought she had misheard him. Maria was used to blending into the background, her days filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and scrape-knee bandages, not champagne toasts and flashing cameras. Her instinct was to decline, but Daniel's tone left no room for argument. It was not a request, it was a decision. Word spread quickly among the staff. The chef raised his brows, the housekeeper whispered to the chauffeur, and soon the entire household buzzed with speculation. Why the nanny? Why not one of the polished socialites constantly vying for his attention? Maria herself couldn't understand. She had no designer gown, no pedigree, no reason to stand in a room full of millionaires. But when Daniel's daughter squealed with joy at the idea of Maria going, clutching her hand and begging her to say yes, Maria reluctantly agreed. What she didn't know was that this single invitation would unravel truths, challenge perceptions, and change lives forever. The night of the gala arrived faster than Maria expected. When she stepped out of the car, her hands clutched the edges of the simple navy dress Daniel had gifted her. It wasn't extravagant, but it was elegant enough to make her feel like she belonged, at least until she caught sight of the glittering crowd. Diamonds sparkled, gowns flowed like rivers of silk, and conversations dripped with sophistication. She suddenly felt like a child playing dress-up. Daniel, however, walked beside her with quiet confidence. His hand rested lightly on her back as they entered the grand ballroom, chandeliers blazing above them. Heads turned immediately. The whispers started as soon as people realized the CEO had brought not a celebrity, not a powerful business partner, but his nanny. Murmurs floated across the room, half disbelief, half mockery. Maria's cheeks burned, her heart pounding in her ears. She tried to shrink into the background, but Daniel remained unbothered. He greeted board members and investors with his usual calm authority, never once letting his composure slip. When someone's eyes lingered too long on Maria, Daniel made sure to introduce her by name, as though she were the most important guest of the night. Still, Maria could feel the stares, the judgment heavy in the air. She told herself to endure it for a few hours, then retreat back to her quiet, simple life. What she didn't realize was that Daniel had no intention of letting her fade into the background that night. Something much bigger was unfolding. Maria had almost convinced herself she could survive the evening unnoticed when it happened. Near the buffet, a man in a tailored suit and a glass of wine in hand let out a laugh loud enough for those around him to hear. A nanny at a gala, he sneered. What's next, the janitor giving the keynote? His companions chuckled, their eyes darting toward Maria like knives. The word struck harder than she expected. Heat rose to her face, and she instinctively lowered her gaze, wishing she could disappear into the marble floor. Every insecurity she'd buried resurfaced in that moment, her modest upbringing, the second-hand clothes she'd grown up wearing, the endless hours she spent working just to make ends meet. She wasn't supposed to be here, and now everyone knew it. She turned slightly, ready to excuse herself and slip out before her humiliation grew worse. But before she could move, Daniel's voice cut through the laughter, calm yet razor-sharp. Careful, he said, his eyes locked on the man. You're mocking the woman who saved my daughter's life. The room fell silent. Maria froze, her breath catching. Daniel continued, his voice carrying enough weight to hush the entire crowd. When my little girl collapsed during an asthma attack, it wasn't the doctors, the investors, or any of you who were there, it was Maria. She didn't hesitate. She gave her everything to keep her alive. So tell me, what could be more important than that? The laughter died instantly. Maria, stunned, realized this night was no longer about fitting in, it was about being seen. The evening pressed on, but the energy in the room had shifted. Guests who once smirked at Maria now stole uneasy glances, unsure of what to make of Daniel's words. Then, as the music softened and the stage lights rose, Daniel was handed the microphone for his highly anticipated annual address. He stood tall, scanning the ballroom with his usual authority, but when he began to speak, his tone was softer than anyone had ever heard. He spoke about success, about wealth, about the hollow chase for status, and how none of it meant anything without compassion. Then he paused, and to everyone's shock, he extended his hand toward Maria. She hesitated, her heart racing, but he guided her onto the stage. The crowd murmured, baffled. Daniel cleared his throat. Every year, we highlight a new ambassador for our company's charity initiative. But this year, I wanted to choose someone who embodies the kind of strength and generosity we should all aspire to. Turning to Maria, his voice grew steady, proud. This is Maria Alvarez. She has dedicated her life not to money or recognition, but to caring, protecting, and loving without expecting anything in return. When my daughter needed her most, she didn't just do her job, she gave her everything. And that is why she will be the face of our new program supporting families and children in need. The room, stunned into silence, erupted with applause. Maria's eyes filled with tears, her body trembling. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She was honored. She was celebrated. Maria stood frozen on the stage, her eyes glistening as the applause washed over her like a wave she never expected to feel. For years she had lived quietly in the background, pouring herself into the care of others, never imagining that anyone would stop to notice. And now here she was, honored in front of hundreds, her name spoken not with pity or dismissal, but with respect. Guests began to rise from their seats, some moved to tears, others inspired by Daniel's words. A few approached afterward, shaking Maria's hand, thanking her for her service, and pledging donations to the new initiative. The same people who had whispered about her just an hour ago now looked at her with admiration. But the moment that undid her came when Daniel's daughter ran up to the stage, slipping past security and tugging at her dress. She wrapped her little arms tightly around Maria's waist and whispered, her voice small but certain, "You're my hero too." Maria's heart swelled, her tears spilling freely as she bent down to embrace the little girl. The room seemed to blur away, leaving only the warmth of that hug, the purity of that love. As the night drew to a close, Maria finally understood why Daniel had brought her. It wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition that the world needed to see that true worth isn't defined by wealth or titles. It is measured by the lives we touch. And in that moment, Maria realized she had already lived a life of immeasurable wealth.